Right, I'm going to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Joe Kraft, VP in Planning. Joe is an experienced mining engineer and former captain and veteran of the United States Army. After serving as a frontline platoon leader in the 4th Infantry Division during direct combat operations, he transitioned into the mining industry as a mining engineer with Freeport McMoRan. He later held various operational and strategic mine planning roles with Cliff Natural Resources across US, Australia, and Canada. In 2014, Joe joined Minemax, helping customers optimize their mineral assets as a consulting engineer before advancing to general manager of the Americas and taking the leadership of the company in 2021. Today, he continues to serve as the CEO of Minemax while overseeing our whole Datamine portfolio on the planning side. Joe, welcome.
Thanks, Bruno. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It's always great for me to come back to Perth. As Bruno mentioned, I live down here. I did some work down here, and I always have a special place in my heart for Perth and mining engineering and strategic planning because I did so much of my work in the beginning here. So it's good to be back. Today, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into what we're doing developmentally within the Datamine planning portfolio for a number of challenges across the industry. So we really try to orient our priorities around solving today's big challenges. I mean, there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of commodities and mining methods and different ways of doing things. But if I could generalize what those challenges are from conversations that I have with different customers in different places, I'd put them into these buckets, right? The first one is ensuring strategic planning outcomes are practical and achievable. Right, that's the first one. Enabling planners to resolve decision fatigue through really smart scenarios and analysis. Boosting productivity and ramping up overall planning velocity. And that's across lots of tasks, whether it's design and schedule, or whether it's just high frequency technician tasks, editing, all of those types of things. Navigating risk and data confidence. Lots of data out there, and that becomes even more apparent in a multiple tool workflow when you're working across the planning horizons. And sustaining in-house capability. And that's really a demographic challenge that we all face. And that on top of coping when we have dynamic operations, things are changing. How do we ensure that we're still delivering on our objectives? We'll first talk about practicality, and I'm going to talk about practicality in light of strategic planning. Ultimately, a lot of planners are faced with challenges around delivering plans on time that are not necessarily executable, but they need to be operable, right? We're going to be other horizons of planning to add detail as we go further, but ultimately the practicality of that plan will represent its utility in the full of the planning cycle. There's different methods. There's different products. They're not all created equal. And it's really important to consider what the problem is they're trying to solve and the level of detail that they're trying to solve that problem in to ensure the practicality is right. Constraints honored, not assumed, right? We have a number of products which do constraint scheduling. We believe in that form of scheduling. And it's important because oftentimes practicality is related to whether or not you are delivering a plan at capacities, or if you're delivering a plan that violates capacities, it's considered impractical, right? And those constraints could be on a number of things. It can be spatial constraints, right? Vertical advance, lags, face-to-face dependencies. They could be quantity or grade constraints on products or on mining or processing. They could be on financials, right? The objective of the business, whether that's cash flow control, maybe it's a total CapEx amount for budget. All of those things influence the schedule and influence the practicality. We also find that oftentimes there is kind of a series-based planning approach, right? Key decisions are made in isolation, in silos. Maybe they fix the mining sequence, then they do the blending. Then once they have the blending, maybe they'll do their equipment. Then once they have that, then they'll do a CapEx optimization, which is actually just running a CapEx financial model over a given mine plan. And what that ends up being is, unfortunately, a stitched together plan that isn't very practical. And finally, the output needs to be checked. That's got to be checked in tabular basis, visual. Ultimately, the mine planner needs to see what they've got to ensure practicality. So 2 examples of where we're delivering some new functionality in the Datamine portfolio for ensuring plan practicality and strategic planning are in Studio MPVS Plus and Minemax Scheduler. Just as an introduction, because you're going to hear more about these tools later today, Studio MPVS Plus is the next generation for this popular pit optimization, phase generation, and schedule optimization tool from Studio MPVS without the plus. Right? If you were here a couple of years ago, you would have seen Mark Zuckerberg come and give a presentation on his Maroma algorithm. That is something that he's developed. We have a license to embed and now is fully integrated into NPVS Plus. And what that does is it gives us a much more integrated single pass schedule optimization for that product. So someone can go from resource to reserve on a GMP platform in NPVS Plus, and they have all of the practical controls that product is known for around phasing and pushback generation. Additionally, it gives us some capability for future DBS if that is of interest, but it will not replace the existing practical pushback generation. Additionally, Minemax Scheduler, it is the industry standard for enterprise schedule optimization. We've done a number of things recently, and you're going to hear about it today in the CapEx optimization front. And that combined with the widest array of possible constraint types that can all operate in parallel ensures a practical integrated plan and that the modeling of a number of things can happen. It's not limited by some framework or other restriction of the software. The next one is resolving decision fatigue. Right? I think every mine planner is faced with this eventually, if not regularly. And what it means is I've got all of these things I've got to run, all of these scenarios I have to evaluate. How do I possibly get through them all? How do I pick the right ones to go deeper into? How do I ultimately choose my plan, right? So it's all about evaluating and then delivering the right stuff. Some things that I've seen mine planners struggle with and that we're helping address in the software is helping them understand whether if they're modeling something, is it really meaningful in the bigger picture? Or is it really not changing the solution and it's just adding a whole bunch of complexity and I guess burden on the planning process. Additionally, setting up scenarios that are real, not just enumerating every possible scenario for the sake of running lots of scenarios. Speeding up scenarios, right? Everybody's running lots of things. How do we speed that up? How do we automate that? And ultimately delivering a defendable plan the business can execute. Ties back to practicality. 2 areas. You'll also hear about StopeMax later today. We talked about that a couple of years ago when Chris Alford, who's our architect of the Stope Optimizer engine, came and talked about StopeMax. That is a new product that we're building at the moment. It's currently in testing, and what it is a brand new approach to doing underground strategy optimization. So the typical process is very iterative between choosing cutoff grades for stopes, connecting that with a network, which is very manual and onerous, running a schedule with constraints, then determining maybe I've left some value on the table or my schedule doesn't work. I got to go back, choose new cutoff grades, and I've got to repeat this whole cycle, right? Ultimately, StopeMax is going to remove that decision fatigue of all of those points because it's going to be doing it in an integrated way. To touch on how this is also effective in Minemax Scheduler, we provide that native capability to narrow down all of the possible scenarios so you don't have to enumerate for them, right? A key example of that is CapEx optimization. I don't have to say, oh, I'm going to put my expansion in period 2, and then I'm going to run another scenario where I'm going to put it in period 3, and I'm going to run another scenario, I'm going to put it in period 4. It doesn't work like that, right? You give it the option, you tell it how much that CapEx investment costs, if there's a lead up in terms of investment to capacity release, and it will optimize at the same time the sequence is made for the timing and instancing of that expansion. If you have that capability and you still want to run scenarios, we're also building in more scenario processing capability, batch processing, which already exists, and going further. Okay. Nearly all planners are trying to do more with less, right? They're trying to accomplish jobs and get it done faster and easier. One of the areas that is very apparent, depending on who you're talking to, is in design. Back when I was designing pits, we didn't have parametric tools. We didn't have automated pit design tools. These exist today, and they're really good. They don't substitute the planner. The planner still needs to come in and review those designs, make some tweaks, but they can save a ton of time. Ultimately, in the bucket of reducing high-frequency tasks, whether that's editing, plotting, surveying, technician-type tasks, all of that is of major interest to a lot of people in terms of speeding things up. Ultimately, the integrated design schedule workflow, planners spend a lot of time there. It's also a problem. So in terms of equipping for that accuracy and agility and speeding up overall planning velocity, we're working across all of our platforms. So if you're not familiar with these, you'll get a little bit more later on today. But Studio OP, it's our open pit design platform. And in that case, if you haven't used automated pit design tools, you can get practical pit designs with Studio OP in minutes instead of hours if you're doing it manually. Studio UG, we'll have a presentation on that later today, setting up an underground schedule, right? Ultimately connecting that coherent network, accessing all of your stopes, and the necessary dependency creations, all is in there, and that helps speed things up. And in Minescape, our stratigraphic planning tool, you can quickly build strip designs, you can get your mining blocks, you can reserve those blocks, you can get them into scheduling rapidly. So all some great things happening across all three of those platforms. All mine planners use and produce lots of data. You all are aware of this, right? The management of that data, particularly when it's transferred across different tools or within departments or across departments, is a drag on productivity, right? And it's also a possible source of risk and error. It's relevant both at site and at corporate teams or corporate teams that work with sites, teams that work across borders. It becomes even more so. The people focused on strategic planning, in my view, bear a particularly strong responsibility in terms of data because they're often the first consumers of a lot of the geologic data that's coming in, right? So we're building Datamine to integrate naturally, not just within our own stack, but with external tools as well. So we're launching something called Mine Trust, which is a cloud-native data management platform to connect tools and workflows to reduce the risk associated with data, whether that's enabling data centralization, control, governance, storage, and that can be within planning tools, between planning tools, also across to geology and operations. Finally, the last one's about capability. So demographically, everybody is facing this. Some regions worse than others. Talent moves up and on. You have key people that are delivering mine plans. Maybe they move into an operations role. Maybe they move into a management role. You have a hole. You have to cross-skill. You have to upskill. You have to make sure that you're still delivering and producing quality outcomes despite that revolving door. And if you have limitations in terms of tools, it's only going to exacerbate that problem, right? Operations are getting more complex. In some cases, there's open pit underground transitions that are happening. In some cases, teams are being consolidated and they have to work across multiple assets, which means they need to use multiple tools, possibly doing plans in a different way, even though it's a common team. So keeping everybody tooled up to accomplish all of that and keeping your costs under control is a challenge for tech service managers and the like, right? So we're answering this through a new model for accessing software at Datamine. So the traditional model is we provide a fixed number of modules or licenses at a unit price, right? And that works if you know exactly what you need and nothing ever changes, right? It's kind of limiting for these kind of dynamic environments. So this additional way is what we call role-based bundles. So for a strategic planner, an operations planner, a surveyor technician, or a consultant, we have all of the apps that you could possibly need, whether you're open pit, underground, captured in those role bundles. And ultimately, it connects the jobs that need to be done with technology. So you take a subscription out to a bundle, you've got all the tools you could possibly need. If your job changes, if roles change in departments, it's all covered. All right. So that is a very interesting thing. We could talk more about that offline, but I wanted to bring it to your attention. It's a great way to access tools and not have to go back and run through procurement gauntlets to get tools if a project comes up that's temporary or permanent.
Right. Good stuff.
Thank you.
Round of applause. Thanks, Joe.